Okay, awesome. Well, good morning, everyone. It's so great to be here with you all today, and I'm really excited to dive into the topic of how to massively up level your business, and in particular, your business relationships by focusing on three key ways of being. Before we do that, before we dive in, I need to take you back 6.5 years to the fall of 2017, which was a few months after my youngest child was born. And this, welcoming my youngest son into the world was one of the happiest moments of my life. He still brings incredible amounts of joy to myself and my family. But 3 or 4 months after he was born, I was in an extremely low point for a number of reasons. The first was I had been dealing with an autoimmune spinal arthritis condition for the previous 6 years already, and still would have these pretty debilitating flares that would leave me unable to walk at times. Um, the second was I felt my husband needed to change in two significant ways and wasn't seeing change there. And then thirdly, my middle child, who was then 6 years old, was still having these violent behavioral outbursts that were extremely challenging for my husband and me. And nothing seemed to be really shifting on that front as well. So I essentially felt powerless in all three of these areas. Can any of you relate to feeling powerless in any area of your life at any time? Good. So as much as I had done to work on my diet and my supplements, I still had those flares come on occasionally, fairly regularly, actually, especially when I was more stressed. Um, could not eliminate the bad flares in my back. As much as I expressed frustration and pleaded with my husband about these two ways I needed him to change, I didn't see much moving in that direction. And then with my son, despite a lot of research and counseling, the behavioral outbursts continued. So I essentially felt like a victim to their behavior and to life itself in many ways. And I knew that my husband had begun to delve into personal development as part of some entrepreneurial pursuits he was engaged in outside of practicing law. We're both formerly practicing attorneys. And I just asked him one day, I had extremely low point. I said, what can I do to change? Like, what can I do to help myself here? I was beginning to look to him for some advice there. And he said, just go read this book. And it was You Are a Badass by Jen Sincero. Have any of you heard of that book? Yeah, pretty fun book. She's a fun author. And I attribute that moment. I went to the park, I took that book, I read it. I mean, I didn't read the whole thing, but I started to read it. And I attribute that moment to a huge shift in the trajectory of my life, moving from a victim mindset of the problems out there, it's with these people, with my family members, with life, with this autoimmune condition, to where can I take ownership within myself to shift the dynamic in my life and my relationships. I begin to get a glimpse of what that could look like, right? And this is still a continual journey. I'm not there yet, right? We're all on this journey, but you might be wondering now, why am I telling this story? This is a business workshop, right? Why am I telling the story of this family situation and feeling down, 6 years ago? In working with dozens of clients over the past few years, I have seen the extraordinary transformations that can occur when people move out of that, even just 5% from the problem is out there with my colleague, with my business partner, with the situation at work, to what can I take ownership here within myself? The problem's out there to the problem and solution is within me, in my thinking and my heart. How can I shift that? So I want to begin to help us look at that more deeply today in the context of three ways of being. And what I've learned, and I'll share an example just briefly from last week. I had a leader in the legal profession reach out to me who wants help with, he's had a pattern of soured relationships with his legal assistants over the past decade, where the relationship would go from good to bad to terrible in his own words. And he's beginning to look at how can I shift my way of being to not have this continually happen where I'm alienating my own work colleagues, right? So what I've learned, what he's beginning to learn, what I continue to learn is that your way of being will take you much farther in your business. By looking at your way of being, it will take you much farther than purely looking at strategic options, than looking at strategy to shift yourself. And so that's why we're here today. Thank you for being here and being open to possibilities where you can see where you can shift your own being. And with that, I'm going to share some slides so we can dive into the actual content here. So let me bring that on. Okay, you guys see that? Okay, great. So I would love for us to start with an intention. Let's decide to create a breakthrough for each of you on how focusing on your being as a business leader has the potential to create extraordinary results for your business. And how are we going to do that? I want you to listen today about yourself, listen for the gold, listen as if you paid 10K to be here. I know that's quite a large sum of money, but in setting that intention, and there'll be moments to reflect throughout the workshop, I want you to think about who you have been being, not from a place of judgment, but just beginning to get the self-awareness muscles going, and be a co-creator with me in this workshop. Create the 10K insight for yourself in thinking about reflecting on who you've been being and who you could be that could shift your business. And like I said earlier, just moving from like 5%, 10% out of the victim way of being of the problems out there to ownership, or from feeling helpless and stuck to power and freedom and taking responsibility and ownership for your results in your business is super powerful. As far as the content, we're going to be looking at 3 ways of being that can help you transform your business, and particularly your relationships in your business. And that is being open and curious, being someone who speaks straight, and being for your colleagues' success. And then at the end, I'm going to invite you to join Eric and me in a 6-month Being in Business Mastermind program with other business leaders. So before I dive into the first way of being, I just want to give you a little overview of how I came to be talking about being in business, right? I gave you a little vignette or story of my frustrations in my family life. Was a formerly practicing attorney at that point, but was working part-time at that point. But I grew up in a family tree nursery business out in the country outside of Salem, Oregon. If you've ever been to Oregon, it's a beautiful state with lots of lush farmland where I grew up. And my parents gradually grew from scratch to 50 plus employees, a ethnically diverse team. My mom herself is an immigrant. She came from Taiwan and studied soil science and met my dad in Texas. They came out to Oregon. And all that said, I grew up in this environment from a very young age of lots of talk about workplace dynamics, conflict among employees, employee performance. And so this was just part of in my blood, I think, growing up. And my dad in particular was a very inspiring individual for me as a leader in his way of being with his colleagues, with his employees. He would often go out there in the field, in the greenhouse, and be with his employees and do the weeding with them and do the planting and just get to know them, and wanted to learn what their aspirations were. What are their goals? And I always saw my dad as being for the utmost success of all of his employees, no matter where they were in the hierarchical scheme of the nursery. From then, I went out east to Princeton, New Jersey, and got my undergrad degree. It was a bit of a culture shock for me. Eventually went to Notre Dame Law School after that and met my then fiance, now husband, David. And, practiced law part-time while actually practiced full-time for 1.5 years at a boutique litigation firm. And then when I had my first child, my daughter, began practicing part-time. And throughout that time, had the autoimmune struggles and eventually became a coach, and was very blessed to enter into Steve Hardison and Steve Chandler's world. I don't know if many of you are familiar with those coaches, but got some great mentoring and coaching there, and coached attorneys, and gradually started a Being in Business group in the LinkedIn group, and came across the collaborative way. I don't know if many of you have heard of the collaborative way, but it's a powerful paradigm for how to work together as a team and to collaborate effectively. And Lloyd Fickett is the founder of that program, that company. He's been doing it for 30 plus years, and now I'm part of his team as well. And Eric and I had the opportunity to lead a collaborative way book reading last fall, which was really amazing and wonderful for the people who participated. Okay, more importantly, why are you here today? Enough about me. I imagine some of you have experienced or maybe currently experiencing some kind of friction, challenge, conflict in your business, maybe in your relationships. And you see that there is possibly something that you could be doing, a way of being that you could adopt that could shift the dynamic in those relationships and therefore help you to be a more effective leader of your team. Is that the case type a yes in the chat if you know there's more you could be doing in your business and in particular your business relationships to shift your business. Okay, seeing some yeses, great. So the first way of being that I want to address here is being open and curious. This is not the default for most of us, I would say, at least not for myself. The tendency is when there's any kind of challenge, any kind of surprise that's not welcome, any kind of conflict or misunderstanding, we go into self-protection and defensiveness, kind of a fear mode, right? Reactivity, judgment can come on board. And so what I want to propose here and dive into with you is some strategies to help you cultivate this way of being of openness and curiosity. Example from the beginning of the workshop with my husband and my son, I was having challenges with, in that time of period of my life, I did not have as much mental muscle of being open and curious. And if I did, I know it would have served me powerfully in my own family relationships. So I would love for you to begin to take a moment here to begin to reflect on when is the last time you had a conflict, breakdown, or challenge in your work, in your business, particularly a relationship, if you can think of that. If not, it can be, situational. But we're going to refer back to this throughout the workshop. So really want to encourage you if it could be something current, it could be something in the last week, maybe last month. If not, maybe you have to look back a little farther if everything's been going really smoothly in your business. But I want you to think of that and then begin to ask yourself 3 questions here for this portion. Did you in any way blame another person in that situation at work? And I want you to ask yourself these questions, not from a place of judgment, like we're here to judge you right now, right? This is just about building in the self-awareness. Where in that conflict or breakdown or challenge did you blame another person? Did you blame yourself in any way at all? And then thirdly, did you blame the situation? Did you make the situation, and by blame, I mean make wrong. Did you make the situation wrong? Like this is a bad thing. Did you decide up front that this was bad? This situation shouldn't be happening. Okay, so just want you to begin to ask yourself those questions. And again, you're not bad or wrong if you did any of these things. It's just about self-awareness. And then secondly, what were the results of that way of being? Did blaming others, yourself, or the situation, did that forward what you were up to individually or as a team? In other words, did that contribute to what you were up to in your business, vision, mission, project, whatever you were up to? Did that increase trust or rapport on your team to do that? Or did it not? So maybe you could type in the chat a word or two to describe the results. Did anyone actually think that you did blame a person, yourself, or the situation in any way? Just raise your hand if you can think of a situation where that happened. Okay, maybe you could then type in the chat what were the results of blaming others, yourself, or the situation, not being open and curious, but going into judgment and critical energy with your colleagues, with yourself, I find that most often when I'm being critical with others, I'm first being critical within myself and with with the situation itself. Just reflect on that or type in the chat for others to see. So as far as strategies to be open and curious, these are some foundational strategies that I've found to be helpful to cultivate this way of being. We're here to talk about being in business, right? Not necessarily doing in business, but doing and being are very related. And these are strategies that I find helpful to help me cultivate and my clients cultivate a way of being consistently growing in openness and curiosity in any challenge or conflict. And the first is to practice centering yourself. And this is something I do throughout the day and work on with my clients is what I would call mini mindfulness reps, dropping out of your thinking for 10 seconds at a minimum. I think it's great to start the day 10 to 12 minutes to get the flywheel going, to establish that within your being. But basically drop all thinking and drop into your body to one of your five senses. For me, tactile, noticing the weight of my body in my chair or my feet on the ground, my breath, rubbing two fingers together gently. Those are most effective for me. Oftentimes, taste, smell is something that maybe you can enjoy when you're eating a meal, but not so much when you're in a business meeting, right? So let's just practice here, if you will, right now with me. Many of you may already have a meditation type practice or some way to engage in mindfulness throughout the day, but I think it's always something that I have to continually remind myself because it can be so easy to not take the time to slow down. So if you would just close your eyes with me here for a couple minutes or less. I'd just love for you to, I'll do the one that I feel is most effective for me, especially when even I'm engaged in a workshop, is to notice the weight of my body, notice the weight of my feet connected to the ground. And many of you may be seated. You can notice the weight of your body in your chair. I just want you to drop all thinking. If any thoughts come in, just let them go and focus on the weight of your body in your chair. Okay, beautiful. So now another one we can do here is with our breath. For now, you can close your eyes if you'd like, is to notice the temperature difference of the air going in and out through your nose. Okay, beautiful. One that I've been doing more lately is auditory. It's just noticing, slowing down and noticing the bird noises outside and any noises in my house, people talking and so forth. I find that to be very effective as well. So I highly encourage you to use that strategy to literally what we did right now. It actually deactivates the fear regions of your brain and activates the areas of your brain that is the curiosity, creativity, empathy originates in. So I love to think about that as well. This is not only something that feels good, it helps me slow down, but it actually builds the neural pathways in my brain toward being more curious and open. I would love for us to dive into briefly on discernment versus judgment as part of this discussion of being open and curious. This is something that frequently would come up for me and for clients initially when speaking about judgment and blaming others and being open and curious. I think there's a tendency sometimes to think like, okay, drop judgment means I need to be passive. I need to be just without an opinion. I need to just accommodate everything in my life and just be kind of, neutral about everything, right? So discernment versus judgment here, what we literally did with the mini mindfulness reps that we did was we activated what we call the sage or intuitive regions, where intuition arises in our brain. And that's really the difference here with discernment versus judgment is coming from a fear energy, critical, sabotage, blame, shame, criticize, making others, making ourselves wrong, making situations wrong in the sense with a critical, negative or demeaning energy. Versus sage, discernment is more about what can I learn from this situation? How can I improve? How can I help others improve? How can I be for their success and my team's success, right? So does everyone here feel a sense of what the difference is between the two of discernment versus judgment? Just raise your hand if that's something that makes sense. Okay. You know, an example in the workplace would be giving constructive feedback. If perhaps you email a colleague and say, hey, I think we could improve in this, or you could improve in this and that. You know, typically email is probably not the best way to deliver that communication, but you can see how that actually could be, even if you're coming from empathy and being for their success, that's very different than being critical and frustrated in your tone of voice and making them wrong and bad, right? So they're two very different energetically what those are, and the being that you're coming from in delivering that feedback as well. So I would love for you to think about, just in this context, you know, thinking of the conflict or challenge that we brought up earlier. How can you lean into discernment more versus judgment in that situation? Where can you look for the learnings and being for your success and being for others' success versus a critical blame or shame kind of way of being? All right, so the next strategy here is a phrase that I mentioned my dad earlier in the workshop, growing up in the family tree nursery, and we recently spent spring break together down in Mexico, and he was sharing with me again this phrase that I'd heard him use a lot growing up, which is help me understand. And, you know, my dad, as the leader and founder of his nursery business, you know, of course, would get colleagues that would be in conflict at time and have some drama in the workplace. And then he'd hear about it and he'd bring them together and he'd sit down with them and say, help me understand what's going on here, and ask each of them to share their version of the story. And what I love about this phrase is two key words: is help, as a leader, putting yourself in a position of the same level or even below them. Like, I need your help here. Please help me. When people ask for help, people typically want to give help, right? So when we use that term, help me understand, we're putting ourselves at the level or below other people, asking for their help. Help me understand. I'm being open and curious. Please tell me what is your perspective on what's going on here. And I say, don't skip strategy number one first, because if this is merely a tactical strategy of just saying, help me understand every time you're in a situation, a challenge or a conflict at work, it's not going to, people will see through that, right? So we first want to center ourselves and open up the openness and curiosity. And then this can be using language in a very powerful way to help us how we can influence others and elicit, you know, the perspective from other people and what they want to share about their perspective on that. Another, my dad used this phrase, but interestingly, Eric and I have been diving into the learning platform of the Collaborative Way, and this is Lloyd Fickett. He's the founder of the Collaborative Way. I got to meet him in person last week, and am now working with his team as well. And one thing I've noticed in his e-learning platform is that he frequently uses examples where he will use the phrase, help me understand. And I found that really interesting, given that my dad has no association with the Collaborative Way, and I don't typically hear that phrase out and about that people use. But clearly, you know, these brilliant leaders, my dad and Lloyd, have seen it to be very successful in the work environment with conflicts and challenges with your colleagues. The third strategy I want to share here on being open and curious is dropping stories. Does anyone have a tendency to create stories when you're in a conflict or challenge? I know I do. I can think of, even in the last week, stories that I could create in certain situations. And, you know, the example I gave at the beginning of the workshop of being in that low moment as a mom, developing a story of like, oh, I suck as a mom. I should have stayed in full-time law practice, or I wouldn't be dealing with all these family challenges with my middle child, having all these behavioral outbursts. And so we just create all kinds of stories it's just the human tendency to do that. And so what I'm asking of you here is just to begin to be more and more open to when you are creating stories, when things don't go your way in your business. Another example in my own coaching practice is sometimes if I have a prospect that's interested and seems to want to engage in further discussion about my work and their challenges, but then suddenly, they don't get back to me, or the term is they ghost you, right? So it can be easy as an entrepreneur to create all kinds of stories about what's going on with prospects when really that doesn't serve you and what you're up to, and coming from a being of service, your purpose in your business, and instead having the focus on yourself, right? So I just encourage you to look at that and think about, in this last conflict or challenge that we brought up here, what is a story that you created or you've begun to create, and encourage you to just decide to drop it right now. Just a lot of being work I see is just a choice, is first being aware and then choosing to drop it because you see it doesn't serve you. Okay. Another strategy is distinguishing facts or intent from interpretation, meaning, or impact. So I think it can be very helpful when we're in a challenging situation at work or conflict with a colleague to distinguish, and even maybe write down and create on a piece of paper a column that says facts, what actually happened, and then meaning or interpretation on the right side. And I put facts and intent together because for you in your work situation, what your intent was, right? Maybe something happened and you didn't have any intent because it just happened and you learned about it. But maybe it's a conflict with a colleague and you communicated with that person and you had a certain intent in your communication. And you can be clear for yourself what your intent was. And it's important to distinguish that from impact or, interpretation or meaning that others derive from that behavior, because even though we intend something, we intend to give constructive feedback to a colleague, it can land in a way that does not align with being for their success. It can land in a way where they feel you're undermining them or criticizing them. So if we can just be clear on that, I think it can make communications and cleanups with our colleagues much more effective, because we don't need to be right about the impact. We get to be curious and open to learn, how did that land with the other person? How did my behavior or communication land with them? And come from a place of beingness, of openness and curiosity, versus being sure and certain that my intent was this, so you have to react that way, right? I know I can be that way in my relationship with my husband at times when we sit down to talk about something we don't entirely agree on. And in the past, or even now at times, sometimes I think I can conflate the two and be like, well, this is what I intended. So however you reacted was inappropriate, right? But they're two different things. Just get clear on that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well later. So can you think of an example where you have essentially conflated or made one and the same intent and impact in your conflict or challenge at work? And where can you begin to be curious about what other people are, how behavior is landing with them that's separate from your intent or what actually happened? All right, so the last strategy in terms of being open and curious is to look for the gift or an opportunity. And I love this one so much because this is such a fundamental shift when you can begin to be curious about what the gift is or opportunity in any conflict or any breakdown or any situation that initially looks bad. It could even look horrible, right? Or even tragic, sadly, right? Some situations in life, losing a loved one or whatever, that's maybe not a business context challenge, but we're all people, and that happens to people at work, right? They lose a loved one. So if we can begin for ourselves to come from a place of even assuming or deciding to create and look for and be curious for the gift or opportunity in a situation, it can change the dynamic of that situation so magnificently, I would say, because our tendency is to be contracted and to say the situation is bad and this conflict is bad. And when we do that, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So if we can come in and decide, I may not see the gift here, but I'm going to be open to it. And I might even make the leap of faith and say, I'm determined that there is a gift here and I'm going to find evidence for it. And that can just shift the entire trajectory of how that problem or issue or misstep evolves. I'm just going to go over 3 areas that you can create a gift in any situation at work. And that is, first of all, the 3 are knowledge, power, and inspiration. So for knowledge, this is one that we're typically more familiar with, is what can I learn from this situation, right? This project didn't go through, this customer didn't renew, whatever is not going well in your business, from your perspective initially, what can I learn from it? So an example could be a safety issue in the workplace, right? If someone catches a severe safety issue, okay, what can we learn from this so this type of thing doesn't happen again and we get serious workplace injury? Maybe a supervisor makes a comment that's can be seen as disparaging or racist or whatever. That's a time to set aside with that person and get a hold of that behavior and make sure it doesn't continue. An example of a client that I am working with right now who's in the midst of, she's an attorney, but in the midst of a relationship breakup. The man she thought she was going to be with the rest of her life, she's seeing now in the aftermath of the proposal, these dynamics with extended family members, and she's seeing his way of being. And for her, even though it feels tragic, beginning to help her see the learnings in it for her of the type of person and what she's a stand for in her relationships. So those are just a few examples. There's so many different examples. I'm hoping you can think of at least one gift of knowledge in the circumstance that you brought to mind, the challenge. What's something you could learn from this to take with you, to not have that occur again if it's not something that you want to become a pattern in your business. The second one with power is also amazing. All of these gifts and opportunities are amazing, is to use every challenge and conflict in your life and your business as an opportunity to get stronger mentally, to use it as an opportunity to practice mindfulness, to staying centered. Because literally every time you do those mindfulness reps that we practiced earlier, you are building the neural pathway highway, you might say, in your brain toward curiosity, toward openness. So if we can do that with increasingly challenging situations, just like going to the gym and increasing the dumbbell weight, we're going to get better and better. We're increasing the incline. We're going on hikes that are, a little steeper. If you look at it from a fitness standpoint, we're doing that mentally. And that's an opportunity to just be operating more from your intuition, from your wisdom, from your curiosity, and less from fear and self-sabotage. For example, I used to lose my temper regularly with my family members, would even yell at my husband and kids, say things that I would regret later. I can't remember the last time I did that in the last year or two. So, I'm ample room for improvement, and I've noticed that has improved for me significantly. And that's one of the biggest gifts, I would say, from those low moments and those challenges, is it helps me to exercise that within my brain, within my being. The last one I would say is inspiration. And that is basically kind of like turning your pain into your purpose, right? So maybe you can think of your situation here, if it's a challenge, how can you turn that pain of that situation into something that inspires you, into something larger, perhaps in your business, to inspire you and others? An example for me is my story at the outset of this workshop, where I was feeling really low as a mom with after the birth of my 3rd child, and read the book, You're a Badass. And that was just the start of my trajectory. And now being here and sharing this talk on being in business and how working on your shifting your being and being more of an owner in your life can help you tremendously. So that's the way that I've turned my pain into my purpose. And I'd love for you to look if there's a pattern of, the challenges that you're experiencing or in your relationships at work where you could turn that pain into something really beautiful to serve others. All right, so the next way of being is speaking straight. We were talking about being open and curious, and now we're moving into speaking straight. And I just want to preface this that all of these 3 ways of being that I'm sharing are very much tied, work together. Don't want to think of them in silos as, turn on speaking straight, we turn off openness and curiosity. They're very much integrated with each other and serve, build upon each other. So speaking straight, I think many of you know what that means. It's speaking authentically, not BSing people and beating around the bush, right? The reason it's a challenge and it's not the default is it's often uncomfortable. Often it means speaking up about things that we fear will upset others, or maybe we'll be seen as stepping on other people's toes or not doing what, staying in our lane at work. That's a common thing I see with clients sometimes. So I'd love for you to reflect where you, to be honest with yourself here, take a little moment, and where in your business relationships are you skirting the real issue? By skirting, I mean not facing it directly, kind of going into the cave of what the issue is with yourself and others. And in the meantime, you're being annoyed, irritated, angry with the other person. This is something that I see is super common, all of these, but speaking straight is typically, some cultures it's more of an issue than others, but typically there's some pattern that many of us have of skirting the real issue because, it's uncomfortable. And then meanwhile, we're feeling annoyed and irritated and angry. It's not like it's not an issue, we're just avoiding it. So love for you to think about that and type in the chat if you'd like, or reflect for yourself what's skirting the issue, what the results of that have been for yourself in your business. Maybe it's in the current challenge that you are facing right now, where you're skirting it in some way with your colleagues. And I ask these 2 questions for all these ways of being because I find them very helpful to help people shift out of that way of being. Is, does this forward what you're up to individually or as a team? Because if it doesn't forward what you're up to, if it doesn't contribute to what you're up to, then why are you doing it? Right? Not from a way of judgment of yourself, but just for you to get clear. Like, if this isn't forward what you're up to, then maybe it's time to choose a different way of being. Does it increase trust and rapport on your team? Okay. So begin to look at that. Practical strategies for speaking straight. I mentioned it here probably just a little bit ago, but focusing on the cost of not speaking straight, I find to be extremely effective. Again, not from a place of beating yourself up, but just when we look at the cost of not speaking straight, I think that's a huge motivator to take a leap of faith and risk, it not landing well with another person. Is wasted time, wasted energy, wasted money, lowered trust and rapport. And one example that comes to mind for me is I work with a lot of attorneys, and a common refrain that I hear among law firm leaders is the associates, the newer attorneys don't ask for the constructive feedback they need from the senior partners that they work with, and the senior partners don't give them that constructive feedback. And so there's a lot of they're not improving, and then there's lowered trust and rapport because the partners will correct their work but not let the associates know. And it just, it leads to a lot of number of these costs: wasted time, wasted energy, wasted money. The clients aren't getting as good service as they might because the associates aren't learning as much. The trust and rapport lessons between the partners and the associates. So to me, that's a very good example of a failure to speak straight. Okay. So maybe you can think of some instances again in your current challenges where wasted time, energy, and money is a factor due to not speaking straight. Another strategy here with speaking straight, remember we're working on cultivating these ways of being, and these are good reminders. And realizing that speaking straight does not mean being reactive. Okay, it does not mean I don't care. It does not mean being reactive, for number one. So when someone says something to you, speaking straight doesn't mean just spouting out how you feel from an emotionally reactive way of being. Okay. We're always cultivating these ways of being as a way to forward what we're up to in our business, what our team is up to, what we're up to. And it also doesn't mean not caring about how it lands. We can very much be super grounded in empathy and being for others' success, being for sensitive to how it lands with other people while speaking straight. They're not mutually exclusive, right? So just wanted to bring that forth because sometimes speaking straight can be seen as being insensitive, and by no means does it mean that. It's being for our team's success, being for other success can be the most empathetic thing you can do. Lastly here with speaking straight is cleanups. I mentioned that earlier, but just realizing that you don't have control how someone is going to react to your way of being of speaking straight. That's outside your control. However, almost always there's an opportunity to repair any kind of misunderstanding or conflict that may emerge from you speaking straight. And again, going back to intent versus impact, I think this is, again, a very important distinction, is to remember what your intention, if your intention is to be for another person's success and your team, to contribute to what your company or business is up to, you can be sure that speaking straight is, a wise move. As far as how that lands, given the situation or conflict or challenge that's surrounding, it may not land the best, initially at least. But that's why we have this thing called cleanup, where we can schedule a time to sit down with someone or a group of people and get clear on what our intent was and remind that we're being for their success and we're committed to a effective working relationship to work together. All right. So I would just love for you all to begin to take a moment here and think about who you could do a cleanup with today, if that's appropriate. Is there someone in your business that you perhaps feel there's a little misunderstanding? It could be small, it could be big, that you could sit down with and schedule a time and say, hey, I'm committed to this working relationship. Is there something I'd like to talk to you about? And get clear on what that is, what your intent is, how it's landing with them, and vice versa. And so if you could just take a moment and either think of that or write that person and situation down and commit yourself to schedule a time to invite that person to a cleanup. Be a very powerful 10K action move for you right now. That's something that you have going on in your business, some kind of misunderstanding or challenge. All right, now moving into the last way of being we're going to discuss here is being for others' success. Again, this is not typically the default. I notice for myself and for my clients, the default is to often focus on how we are coming across, on our reputation as a leader, as someone who works in a business team. And so this is a very important, like, overarching distinction way of being that I find that it's very useful and comes up a lot. So again, this is about getting the focus off ourselves, how we might be impacted, to how our decisions will impact others, while including ourselves. We're not excluding ourselves from this question or inquiry of being for other success. And I'd love for you to think about, well, let me share before I dive into what that means for you. I was coaching someone at a law firm who reached out to me because she was extremely anxious about a situation where a colleague, essentially like a little bit of her supervisor, but kind of her equal, she felt was intentionally undermining her, like telling her to do things that was not correct, such that her performance would be lowered and not correct. And she had some instances of bringing this up, and he was ignoring it, and she felt like he was continually persisting in this pattern of giving her wrong information and undermining her in her work. And she was basically like, do I talk to my boss about this? I don't want to be seen as a complainer. I don't want to be seen as, you know, someone that's bothersome. And so rather than coming from that being of, I don't want to be seen as this, I don't want to be seen as that, I asked her, you know, what would be for your colleague's success? Let's say this colleague is undermining you. He's repeatedly trying to, you know, make you screw up at work. What would be for his success? What would be for your team's success? And in that inquiry, she arrived at, yeah, it's being for his success to talk to my boss about this, because I'm getting a feeling based on what I've heard from other colleagues that he's been doing this to past employees that have been in my position who then left, right? So they've all left perhaps this role that she's now currently sitting in because of this behavior. So it would not be for his success to allow him to persist in this and be in that sense, a victim to his behavior. So her taking ownership and speaking to her supervisors what she did, and that worked out beautifully for her. So I'd love for you to look at where in your business relationships are you more worried about how you will be perceived than taking action that would further your colleague's success, maybe it's or a business partner, or your team's success. Just take a moment. And by success, I mean your overall well-being, their overall well-being, their career growth, their learnings. And like I said, this does not exclude you thinking about what would be in furtherance of your own success as well. They're equally important. So just take a moment here and think about how there's a situation there, perhaps in the one that you brought up earlier, where you could be, how could you be more for the other person's success? Okay. As far as strategy for being for other success, I think the best is just ask the question. I find this to be something I use in my own family life as well. Like, what would being for his success or her success in this situation look like? In the business context, it could even look like letting someone go. Okay, so being for their success is not always the most merry, happy kind of outcome necessarily for everyone at the moment, but in the long run, being for others' success sometimes means making those tough decisions and speaking straight and doing what's in the best for the team's success in your business. Okay, the second strategy here is to look for positive intent. We always want to be the default, again, even from the first open and curiosity way of being, is to be defensive, to be reactive, to judge and blame others, to create stories, to all of those things we talked about with openness and curiosity, rather than looking for positive intent. So it really helps in our workplace relationships if we can come from even an assumption that people have positive intent, you know, or at least looking for it, being open and curious to find where their positive intent may be. And then if you need to, have a straight conversation about it where you can clear up those misunderstandings, but coming from a way of being of this person is being for me is hugely helpful in your work relationships. And just briefly, because I know we're getting closer to time here, just share a brief story of coaching a couple HR leaders at a law firm who I was brought in to coach because they're in extreme conflict. It was undermining, affecting the culture of the whole law firm. And in coaching them, I quickly realized, and they saw for themselves in our work together, how they were creating a story of she's undermining me and she's undermining me. So everything that the other person did, they were coming through the lens of she's undermining me. And you could see how that would result in continued friction and alienation between the two of them. So once they began to be more aware of their own judgments of each other and themselves and see how they're creating that story, they decided to take on the way of being of looking for positive intent, or assuming even positive intent, that they're being for each other's success. And that totally shifted their relationship. And then they became really great working colleagues and best supporters for each other in the workplace. So lastly here, I would just love for you to think of ways that you can be for others' success even more in your business. Number one, who is that you can, who is that you're thinking of that whom you can be for their success even more? It could be one person, could be a number of people. How can you be more for their success? And again, that might involve being more open and curious. It might mean speaking straight while being for their success about some areas of improvement, or ways taking ownership for your own behavior and being for their success, and how maybe you haven't been haven't been that way of being for them as much as you'd like to be. And then your action plan. So what is that? What can you commit to today to doing in the next week or two, to making a time on your calendar to implement, to take action? Being is important, but doing is very much tied to being, and by doing things, we are actually planting the seeds of our being as well. All right, so almost here at the close, before I introduce the mastermind to all of you, I want you to, this is a phrase that Eric's been using more and that I really think is beautiful, is to lean in. What is the 10K action you will take from this workshop? Being open and curious, being speaking straight with others, being for others' success. They're hugely, massively helpful ways of being that can help you improve your business and your relationships. So I encourage you to keep choosing to be open and curious, being someone who speaks straight, and being for your colleagues' success. And with that, I'd love to dive into the opportunity that Eric and I have for all of you in attendance today. Is a 6-month mastermind that he and I have already started in the month of March, so about a month in. It's for people who are in business that lead teams. It includes managers, business owners, CEOs, or anyone who's leading a team. As far as the dates, we're meeting on the first and third Tuesday of the month at 10 a.m. Pacific. These are 90-minute group calls twice a month, and it's for 6 months, and we started in March. Those calls are recorded for the first month of March. Just looking at, hopefully from this workshop, you begin to see ways that you can shift your being and how that can massively impact your business. But I want to help you remind you here that when you shift your being, you create the possibility to shift your staff, your vendors, your business partners, customers, clients, not to mention your family and your personal relationships as well, right? So you can shift your entire company when you as a leader begin to be aware of your current way of being and choose a more powerful way of being. This mastermind is also going to, it's going to grow you, but you're also going to grow clarity, or gain clarity on your vision, your mission, where you're headed, and help get your team members aligned behind that as well. You'll learn how to incorporate your business into your document or declarations. And if you're part of the Ultimate Coach, if you've read that book, this is a way we consciously create who we're being through language on a daily basis. You're going to learn how being in business can help you achieve better results in your business. And you're also going to learn the collaborative way, which we're diving into now in the mastermind, which is this paradigm that includes speaking straight and being for others' success, among 3 other ways of being, all forwarding what we're up to in our business. Again, as far as what it's included, these 2 90-minute calls per month include 30 minutes of training, 30 minutes of masterminding, which is basically sharing with each other what we see, perspectives for each other to improve our businesses, and 30 minutes of Q&A and group sharing, and all calls are recorded. As well as those 2 90-minute calls per month, there's going to be an all-day being in business training that Eric and I will co-lead next month in May. And it includes an hour of one-on-one coaching with either one of us or both of us divided up, and as well as a group community in Facebook or WhatsApp. And if you join today as a bonus, we're going to allow you to add a key person in your business at no extra cost. As far as the investment goes, this is a $15K investment. This is the fee we will eventually charge once we have the case studies to demonstrate the value of the mastermind and being in business, and also with the collaborative way being brought in there as well. We're going to limit the group to 12. We have a handful of participants already who are having some massive learnings and sharings with each other. And we'll be adding those participants until we reach a maximum of 12. As far as your investment today, it's only a fraction of the 15K. A fifth of that is 3K. And you can pay that either upfront as a 3K investment or 7 payments of 500. If you are interested in pursuing this opportunity with Eric and me, I ask you to request an interview by emailing me at uplevel@joanclairecoaching.com. That's JOANCLAIRE coaching.com. And just to recap, that includes 6 months of being in business training, the 2 90-minute calls with training, masterminding, and Q&A, the all-day being in business training next month in May, and an hour-long one-on-one coaching session. And lastly, we're offering a double bonus to you magnificent people today here is if you request an interview with me in the next 10 minutes, I will get you an additional hour of coaching for a total of 2 hours of one-on-one coaching. And I know Eric and I have been very generous with their current participants, really helping them dive into their visions. And Eric has a lot of experience with being your vision. And I know he's being very generous with the participants in that and would help you get up to speed as well. And so just email me at uplevel@joanclairecoaching.com. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Eric if he has any closing comments for our participants today.
Fantastic. Well, let me just start off and say thank all of you for attending live. I know we have a group of you that are watching the recording, and I want to acknowledge you for leaning into being in business and really working on your being over this last hour. And Joan-Claire, I want to thank you for delivering a phenomenal training. Every time I listen to you, I learned so much. And I'm excited for those of you that want to continue on this journey with Joan-Claire and I on being with a focus on being in business. I've been a business owner for 25 years. And I've been working on being the last 2 years, and it's really been incredibly powerful to look at being through the lens of business and to really lean in and work on it. And you got an experience of that for an hour with Joan-Claire, and we're going to be doing this for the next 6 months for a small group. And we're excited to work with those of you that would like our help. And so just send Joan-Claire an email. The email address is on the screen there to request an interview with her and get your questions answered. And for those of you that would like to register, you'll have the opportunity to do so. And I'm looking forward to spending some one-on-one time with each of you that do register. So with that, Joan-Claire, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right. Thank you, Eric. Yeah, so excited to keep working with you in our mastermind. Thank you to all of you for your generous listening today. Appreciate your participation and listening to this about you, and really encourage you to just go out there and create the 10K action steps from this workshop today. So thank you for being here, and I look forward to hearing from you after the call if you're interested to join the mastermind. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Bye.